Today we're going to be multiplying fractions with models and number lines, and we're going to represent fractions in different ways. Our goal is to use models and number lines to multiply fractions. Let's look at our first example. Find the value of the fractions by multiplying with models. So we have 1/6 of 3/4. So the way that this is, of course, read is 1/6 of 3/4, which anytime you see that of, that's a good hint that you're going to be dealing with multiplication, especially with fractions. So that literally means 1/6 times 3/4. So what we're going to first do is we're going to create our horizontal lines and shade in 3/4 using blue. So we have 1, 2, 3 out of 4. Then vertically, I'm going to draw my 6. And then I'm going to shade in 1/6 in yellow. If I was doing this with a highlighter, it would be a little bit better, but this software is a little limited. So what I need to now do is say, okay, how many of them overlap? So if you've done this in a highlighter, all your answers, yellow and blue, of course, make green. So your shaded areas should be green, if this was marker or highlighter or paint. So you would count that up. So we have 3 out of, and we have 12, 24 total. So 3/24, and I need to, of course, simplify that, which the 3 and the 24 are both divisible by 3, so that gives us 1/8. So 1/6 of 3/4 is 3/24, or 1/8. So building models with multiplication is a good way to really visualize the answers. Let's look at another example. Diego's mom had 3/4 of a cup of blueberries. She split the blueberries among her 3 children. Each one received 1/3 of the blueberries. What fraction of a cup of blueberries did each child receive? Again, we have that keyword of, and we have 3/4 and then split it into thirds. So we have 1/3 of 3/4. So each child received 1 out of 3. So let's first look at our 3/4. So we have 3/4 of a cup of blueberries. Again, I'm going to shade 3/4 in blue. And then we need to horizontally look at 1/3. So I'm going to divide this into thirds, and I have 1, and I'm going to shade that in yellow. So of course, yellow and blue make green. So now I can see visually, well, I have 1, 2, 3 out of 4, 8, 12. 3/12, which I can reduce, is 1/4, because they're both divisible by 3. If you're struggling reducing fractions, go back to the tutorial where we reviewed reducing and expanding fractions, writing equivalent fractions. So I hope this helps you both understand the concept of multiplication as well as helps you visualize it. Now let's look at another model to represent multiplication of fractions. Manuel was up to bat 9 times in his last 2 baseball games. 1/3 of his at-bats were hits. He wanted to determine how many hits he had during his 9 at-bats. He must find the value of 1/3 of 9, of course, 1/3 of 9 in order to find the answer. Manuel did this by drawing a model. Help Manuel solve this problem. So we can see Manuel has drawn 9 baseballs. Those are his at-bats. And we can see that he needs to figure out what 1/3 of those at-bats would be. Well, if we divided these into 3 equal sections, we can then see that 1 out of those 3 would be 3. So Manuel had 3 hits. Good job, Manuel. So this is a different kind of model where we're using pictures to represent multiplication of fractions as well as fractions and whole numbers. Now let's look at a number line model. So we have 1/3 of 3. So really what we need to do when we have a number line problem is think of multiplication, which is just repeat addition. Remember, when you multiply 2 times 6, you're really adding 2 6 times. And remember that, of course, in this case, we have to look at the the multiplication problem differently. But this is a different way to help you visualize multiplication of fractions. So on this number line, we have 1/3. Well, we have 1 whole here, and so we need to break this up into thirds. So between 1 and 0, we have 12 units. So 1/3 of those units, we can break that down into 4 different sections. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have thirds. So I have 1/3 here, plus 1/3, and 1/3. So I've added it 3 times. So that answer gives me that 1/3 of 3 is equal to 1 whole. And I'm going to write whole because it's really important that you understand the difference between whole numbers and fractions of numbers. So this is a different way that'll help some of you understand why these work. For some of you, the rectangle method is going to be a little bit easier. It's just how you learn math. Now let's look at another example. How much is 5/6 added half a time? 5/6 times 1/2. Well, what we need to look at is what are each of these units. So each of these units we can see on the number line. We can count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means each one of these units is 1/12. So now that I've done that, I can start at 5/6, which of course 5/6 is equivalent to 10/12, which is right here. And now I have to add that half a time. So now I'm starting with 10/12 as pretty much my whole, and then I need to look at the number line about halfway. Well, you could do that, of course, by going one at a time in opposite directions until you get directly into the middle. So we can see what happens when we go straight into the middle with our marker, and we can count up, of course, that we've landed at 5/6. So we've gone halfway between 10/12 and 0. So that's another way of solving with a number line. Let's try one final example. 1/2 times 1/2. So we're asking how much is 1/2, sorry, I said 1/2, 1/2 times 1/2, which asks us how much is 1/2 added 1/2 times. Well, first I need to look at my fractions again on the number line. and I can see that there are 4 units, so each of these represents 1/4 of a whole. So I'm going to go to 1 1/2, so 1 1/2, which is the same as 6/4. And I need to add that 1 1/2 times. Now remember, I'm not adding 1 1/2 to that, I'm adding 6/4 1 1/2 times. So that's the difference, remember. So I'm looking at 6/4 of 6/4, which is another way of saying 1 1/2. You can reduce those too if you like. So if this represents my whole, I need to say, well, 1 times is there, and then half of that, half of 6/4 would be 1, 2, 3/4, which gives me 9/4. So again, 1 whole of 6/4, 1 times 6/4 is 6/4. 1 times anything is that answer. And then I'm adding half of that. And remember, half of 6/4. Half of 6 is 3. So that gives me 9/4, or if I reduce it, 2 1/4. And I can see on the number line I'm at 2 1/4. So great job using the number lines. For some of you, it might make more sense to visualize it with the number line. For some of you, it might make more sense to visualize it with diagrams or pictures. Finally, I want you to think about an extension activity. We're going to use pattern blocks to multiply fractions. And come ready tomorrow to think about what that would entail if I told you to use this as a whole. So we have an octagon. That's going to represent 1 whole. How would you show me 1/2 of 3 of these octagons? So think of that with the pattern blocks you're going to be using yesterday. This activity, I just want you to have it on your notes as a brainstorm activity. We're going to come to class and explain it as a group. So now take a minute to review your notes. Make sure you have all the necessary information that you need. Compare them with my own notes, and if you need to add anything, don't forget to do that. Remember to put your questions and your summary in the appropriate places. Another great job today using models to multiply fractions and mixed numbers. So make sure that you're taking notes carefully and coming with any questions you may have. I know that making models for every single scenario is not always the most logical thing to do, but it is important that you review how to make models and to show why problems actually function properly. Next time we're going to get into multiplying fractions the more traditional way. So great job today. Remember, fractions are all around us, especially those of you who are musical. So get out there and have some fun. Play some instruments. Good job.